population equality. We want to make sure our deviations are under 10%, but those deviations within that range are certainly justified to ensure the wards are formed of compact, contiguous territory, drawn to reflect and respond to communities of common interest, ethnic background, and physical boundaries. Consideration should not be given to the number of registered voters in a ward, partisan membership, historic voter turnout, or current council member residences, and that information was not provided to the commission. Consideration is given to whether each ward is likely to grow in its number of residents or whether it is already fully developed and less likely to grow over the next 10 years. We know we have some wards that are fairly landlocked, that are fully developed, and they're probably not going to see a lot of population growth. And we know from our platting that we have some wards with a lot of growth that'll probably occur over the next 10 years. So that had to be considered because we want these numbers to work for everyone for the next 10 years. If each ward were exactly equal, they would have 16,003.25 residents. Figure out how you split someone 4 ways. So obviously we can't be mathematically precise, but that is the number that the commission was really searching for, or trying to equalize to. As you address the population shortage or overage in one ward, it inevitably affects another ward. This was my first time to see this process in action, and it was pretty fascinating to see. You think you fixed one, oh, that affected the next one, and that affected the next one, and you just kind of end up working your way around in a circle. So there's no one right answer, but this is what the commission has come up with. And with that, I'll turn it over to the chair to address the rest of it.
I think Catherine has done a good job of the overview of the process. What I wanted to say specifically was about how the process took place, and that's this. Wards 2, 3, and 4 had the least population growth potential, so they needed to have population added to them. The committee tried to leave the deviation of those wards positive to try to keep their populations in line with faster growing wards for a longer period of time. The committee was very successful in the cases of Ward 2 and Ward 3. Wards 5, 6, and 8 have the most growth potential over the next decade, so the committee left them with negative deviations to allow for more growth over that time period before they become much more populous than other wards. So you're taking into account the 10-year time frame. Wards 1, 4, and 7 were left with deviations of less than 1% from the ideal ward size of 16,003. Now we will invite public comment. We're going to call your name. And what was that? Oh, we're doing this first? Okay. No, take it back. We're going through the ward slides which show how they were changed. So here's Ward 1. On the one side, you see the proposed ward, which is what the commission is recommending, and then the current ward. So you see how much these are changing and or not changing. The charts show their population, their starting standard deviation, like how far off they were from the standard deviation due to their population, and where we took population from, where we put population in, and what the ending population was. So you see here that Ward 1 ends with a population of 16,083. Pretty good for aiming for 16,003. Ward 2, one side is the proposed side. This was a small change in Ward 2. We mentioned that Ward 2 was a low population growth. It's landlocked, so it doesn't have a lot of room to grow. Starting population, their standard deviation or starting standard deviation, where they took a little bit of population. The ending population was 16,757. So they're a little bit over the standard deviation for wards. Ward 3 had a starting population of 14,824 and a negative standard deviation. So we took parts of Ward 8 and gave them to Ward 3, and took parts of 3 and gave them to Ward 8, ending, oh, it doesn't have the final population on this one.
Oh,
I just noticed that.
16,943.
Ending with a population of 16,943. So there's a standard deviation there for that as well. Ward 4, there's the current Ward 4, the proposed Ward 4, which we really just tried to take out the curves. Starting population of 14,129. Ward 4 was the slowest growing ward over this time period. So we took a little bit from Ward 7 and Ward 8 to make this one ending population 15,897 for a slightly negative standard deviation because we don't expect that Ward 4, which is landlocked, will be growing. Ward 5, starting population of 16,610. We took some of Ward 6 and put it in Ward 5. We took some of Ward 1 and put it in Ward 5. The ending population was 15,339 for a slightly negative standard deviation because we expect population in Ward 5 to grow. Ward 6, there's currently what it looks like. Here's the proposed version. Starting population of 18,515. So Ward 6 has had quite a bit of growth. Some of Ward 8 was taken. Some of Ward 6 was given to Ward 5. The ending population, 15,344. So still a small negative standard deviation because the expectation is that Ward 5 will be growing. Here's the difference between current Ward 7 and proposed Ward 7. And basically what we did here was we took out a lot of the lines and tried to make them more straight. Beginning population of 18,309. A big standard deviation, so Ward 7 was a lot bigger than the standard. The ending population with making the small change that we made is 16,067, very close to the 16,003 that we were aiming for. The last of the wards, Ward 8, you see the difference between the current guidelines and the proposed guidelines. The beginning population was 15,776, so less than what we were aiming for with 16,003. There were elements that kind of went into Ward 8 that came from Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward 4, and Ward 6. The ending population, 15,596. A little bit below the negative standard deviation because once again we're expecting population growth in Ward 8 given where the plats are and where growth is happening. So this is what it turns out to look like as far as the proposed boundary changes are. Is that good enough? Okay, so now we're going to open the meeting for public comment and we'll call you up one at a time. If you would, please give us your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes to speak. So there's no particular order to this. This is just the order of them sitting in the pile. The first person is Mark Wagner.
Good evening, I'm Mark Wagner, 3550 Duke Drive, which is in Ward 5. I think Ward 5 is being treated differently in this census. First of all, by your own rules, you said there shouldn't be more than a 10% deviation between the highest and the lowest. Ward 3, the highest, has 15,943. Ward 5, the lowest, has 15,339, which is 1,604. So that's even outside of a very wide, a 10% variation is pretty wide. Second of all of Norman is landlocked. To say that one ward is landlocked implies that another is not. Ward 5 may be more so, though, than any of the others because of the restrictions on subdividing the plats of land. So therefore, Ward 5, I believe, will be slower, and it actually has over the 5% deviation, and the slower growth should be accounted for. In addition, I believe there are tribal lands in Ward 5, and were the citizens that live on tribal lands, which I don't believe are part of the city, were they counted in this number during a calculation? So again, I think it may have not been the intention of it, but it appears that the rural areas on both the east and the west side of town are being diluted by putting them in with other urban areas. The southwest corner of Ward 5 is more urban and would be a more likely candidate to be added to the core Norman than the northwest side, which is rural and was added. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Hackelman.
Name is Tom Hackelman. I reside at 1812 Quail Creek Drive. For the past nearly 2 years, I've had the privilege of serving on the Charter Review Commission. Charter Review Commission, as you know, has significant issues to debate, to discuss, to wrestle with. And so it's been, a long but positive 2 years of wrestling with these topics. The challenge I have is that you made these decisions, albeit very important decisions, but decisions that were made over a 2-meeting period. One of the biggest things that I'm challenged with is based on the instructions that includes that the committee include boundaries drawn to reflect and respond to communities of common interest. What we're looking at is we feel like there's not been a significant approach to this from a standpoint of drawing those lines to common interest, to common ethnic backgrounds, everything else that goes along with that. And 2 meetings does not seem to be sufficient to argue that case, to really design this appropriately. What it looks like is you really took the attempt to really, first and foremost, draw the lines as straight as possible and cut out things irrespective of how the lands, how the area and the geography has been designed. At the end of the day, it really feels like it's gerrymandering, that we're doing things to impact a political agenda more so than we are to manage and balance the population circles that are there. So I would challenge you and encourage you. This needs to be postponed as far as a vote, as a part of a recommendation. I really believe that you need to go back, re-examine this, and start over.
Thank you. Mark Smith.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, thank you so much. Deborah Smith. Okay. Mark Swatkowski?
Sorosky.
Sorry.
It's all right.
So it's an R, not a T. Swarovski?
Yeah, you wouldn't be the first person to misspell. So,
My last name is Cardula, so it gets pronounced wrong all the
Very
time.
good. So I'm here to talk more about procedure and my understanding what happened, kind of similar to what the previous gentleman talked about. So I'm going to quote it. I can't quote the whole hour and 45 minutes of the recording, but you guys probably know the context. So the quote is, "What's going on currently in Ward 5, kind of reflects the opposite. We have a person who I don't think is a farmer, but is dangerous in many ways." So they're referring to the current Ward 5 council member. So it's disturbing that somebody is on a committee to determine boundaries of a ward, and they're saying the current council member is dangerous. I don't understand that. I don't know what kind of danger he poses to this person or this individual, but I really don't think a person who feels that way brings in I'm going to assume their political opinion or bias into a decision about ward boundaries should be a part of any committee. If what we're doing here is supposed to be all bipartisan, no political affiliations, that person should not be a part of any of this. And anything they've touched or been a part of should get wadded up and thrown in the trash because it's tainted. So that's it. Thank you. Mark Sorosky, 9724 Lily Lane, Ward 5.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
The next person is Cheryl Blake.
Cheryl Blake, 1501 Fisher Drive, lived out there 38 years, was there when the lake was built, been in Norman since 1963. It would serve you all well to go learn the history of the Ward 5 area. That land was annexed by the city of Norman back in the late 50s into the early 60s for the purpose of developing Lake Thunderbird as a water source for the city of Norman. The original intent for that obviously is you can't have a water collection system if you plug it up. And as you move your development further and further east, you are clogging up the recharge zones for the city of Norman, which was Lake Thunderbird, 50-year lake. You're now pumping water out of the Garber-Wellington aquifer. We all in Ward 5 that don't have city stuff, our water comes from a different part of that aquifer. That's the recharge zone. That's where the water that hits the surface goes down. I believe the guy last month said from the city and ACOG that 90% of the water that hits the ground is absorbed, the rest of it's runoff. We've got that. We have 90% going into the ground. As you encroach and as you take all of that, you're messing up the recharge area, not just for us with our water wells, but you're taking it into that lake. So you're cutting your own throats every time you start moving development over into that area. I agree with the gerrymandering. I think you need to look again. This is the 1995 thing on the urban suitability. And if you look at this and start with this, you're going to find out what can be developed and what can't be developed, because it's going to tell you where the floodplains are, what the surface stuff is. If you need, if you have bedrock, hard rock, sandstone, shifting, go try to build something on the shifting sand. This is something that you should have been looking at, and this is a consideration because everybody in these areas has a common interest. We want to keep it rural because we need it to be rural. We didn't ask to be annexed. We didn't ask to be annexed. And if you're not going to take care of the property that was entrusted to you from the people that lived here 70 years ago, perhaps we should consider de-annexation because you are getting rid of the intent. Let's see here. Greed seems to be more valuable. I get very frustrated when I hear all this stuff about we can't euthanize the cats, the dogs, but you have no problem dividing all this and pushing it all out, chasing all the wildlife off, putting in your roads and your bikeways and all this, using us for your backyard. We don't appreciate that. We care about the animals that are out there. We care about the animals that we're raising for food. We care about the animals that live out there, and it's important to us. And we bought that land out there if we bought it. Most of that land has been in families since state.
Thank you. Jeannie Wheeler?
Hi, I'm Jeannie Wheeler. I live at 214 Rose Rock Drive. I'm sure this was not an easy task to do. So we appreciate your efforts and we appreciate you hearing our voices on this. As a realtor, one of the things that I have noticed is that particular area is one of the slowest growing. It is a very, very, very low turnover rate. As she mentioned, a lot of it is family land and they're passing it on to their families. And so there is very little movement going on in Ward 5. But as a realtor, there's a statement in the criteria of what you base this on that causes me concern and would love for you to help me understand what you mean by it. Because when I hear the term based on ethnic background, how does that not violate 3 words that you have here in this introductory paragraph of grounds on race, ancestry, and national origin? How does that not violate redlining laws? So that's my question to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Dawn Wheeler?
Don Wheeler, 214 Rose Rock Drive, Ward 5. Well, all the ones that came before me are certainly more knowledgeable than I am on the history. But I heard the news program last week and would just like to echo, that was disturbing. That was clearly partisanship and bias for what that person said on that committee. It's also my understanding, and there's probably another gentleman that's gonna speak more knowledge on it than I can, that I understand the city of Norman purchased software to decide districting and haven't used it. They did a committee and didn't use the software that they bought. So that's all I got to say, just other than echo again, you know, back in the 1920s, the courts outlawed redlining. And that's what you're doing. Thank you.
Delina Gleason?
Hello, my name is Delina Gleason. I live at 8120 East State Highway 9, Norman, and I'm a Ward 5 member. I'm against this ward boundary plan as proposed. I believe you should keep the politics out and focus on your mandates of keeping like interests together. To me, it makes no sense to move 11 square miles of farmland into an urban ward. I do believe that this is more politically motivated, not rather than population motivated. And there will be counselors. The ones that it affects will be displaced according to the transcript. And so I believe that you should go back to the drawing board. So thank you.
Thank you. Becky Bendur?
Becky Bender, 1911, 136th Avenue Southeast. I believe this ward boundary change specifically targets a duly elected representative by a council that is supposed to be nonpartisan. So I am against it.
Thank you. Roger Gallagher?
Roger Gallagher, 2513 Woodsong. I've been on a few committees, and I was on council 10 years ago. Catherine was there at the time when I was part of the redistricting. It's probably difficult because as the city grows, you're going to see some changes. But aside from that, the one thing that bothers me is committee members are supposed to be neutral. They're supposed to pay attention to the subject and try to avoid, most of all, try to avoid personal comments that the public hears. It's a shame that happened. We all have our own ideas. Norman politics is not gentle. It's dog eat dog sometimes, and it depends if you're conservative, independent, or liberal. So that comment came from a person who objects to the politics of one of the council members. So I'm curious why you didn't, unless this was the last meeting, you didn't come back and say, let's take another meeting and look at this, because this is not conducive to a committee thinking of the welfare of the whole city. Aside from 5 being a lush agricultural area that we like to get out and drive through and see and fish and do those things. It is too bad Norman's changing that much. But 5 is probably going to hold that as long as possible. So my main comment here is that comment has opened the door to prejudice. Now, if you don't go back and look, you're going to inherit the concept that you are doing what you want by gerrymandering. There are 3 council people, and I remember the one 10 years ago when I was on council. You try to avoid moving people around because a committee chose something that the council simply backed up. So I think you should reconsider that. It's not a good deal. You don't you don't coincidentally get rid of 3 council people. That must have risen in your meetings when you looked at that and said, wait a minute, we're moving 3 council people out, putting them in another ward. There is something to be said for wards and the so-called mini culture of the area, but that's my main point, and this is not the right answer. I think a better answer exists, and a better answer exists by going back.
Robert Gleason?
I'm Robert Gleason. I live at 8120 East State Highway 9. And I'd like to say, I echo what everything's been said so far. My concern is the people in each one of these wards that you're moving the boundaries around. I've talked to so many people. I said, what ward are you in? I don't know, maybe Ward 2 or Ward 3. They don't know what ward they're in. And if we move them now in elections in February, what's going to happen to these people? Are you going to send notices out to these people that are in different wards now? How are they going to know they're in Ward 2 or Ward 4 or Ward 6? How are they going to know that in the elections in February? It's just going to confuse things. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie Logue?
I'm Maggie Logue at 2345 Blue Creek Drive. I'm Ward 5. From my understanding, this committee has been accused of gerrymandering. And just to be clear, I want to give everybody on the committee and the people here what the definition of it is. It's the practice of dividing or arranging a territorial unit into election districts in a way that gives one political party an unfair advantage in elections. From what I have seen on how you're trying to divide Norman, it affects mostly Wards 5 and Ward 3, which are our most recent conservative elected council members, and I have a problem with that. I think the committee needs to be null and void and start over, maybe with new people. My other concern is that the Reapportionment Committee members are nominated by the mayor, and I understand they're approved by the council, but I would like to know when you all were approved. Has it been since our new council members were elected, or was it before? That speaks volumes to me. I have an issue with you all trying to move farmland into an urban area. That, you know, the city charter recommends that the boundary lines are redrawn with considerations such as common interests, ethnic background, and physical boundaries that reflect voters in a ward which they most naturally belong. Well, I'm sorry, urban and rural don't exactly have the same interests, and that's an issue for me. Like I said before, the biggest impact is obviously Ward 5 and 3, and I just feel like, according to the definition of gerrymandering, that is what has happened. I also want to mention to the female, I don't know who it was that said this, but to refer to my duly elected council member as dangerous in many ways, and so that's to be considered? What is wrong with this committee? Seriously.
Thank you. Patrick O'Brien. Okay, thank you. Fred Pope.
Fred Pope, excuse me, 1501 Navajo Road. From what I'm given to understand, this present proposal by the Reapportionment Committee for redistricting the wards in Norman contains elements of gerrymandering that may be a bit subtle, albeit intentional, for average citizens of Norman, in a proclaimed effort to make neater, straight-line boundaries for Norman's wards. It just happens to move the addresses of 2 of Norman's present councilors out of the boundaries for which they were elected. This has the practical and immediate effect of nullifying their election, because they would no longer reside in the ward for which they were elected. Is it perhaps reasonable to come to the conclusion that these 2 councilors have been redlined, or in this case, straight-lined, out of their duly elected positions? Why should this happen when other districts within a given ward could have been used to more equitably distribute population according to the requirements associated with the U.S. Department of Census data? According to the Norman transcript of September 23, as someone else has, a couple of other people have referred to, a member of the redistricting committee can be heard saying at a meeting, "We have a person in Ward 5 who I don't think is a farmer but is dangerous in many ways, and so that is to be considered." The mayor has considerable influence and control over the composition of any committee established for the city's concerns. He or she can encourage members of a coterie to volunteer for any given committee, thus practically guaranteeing a previously desired outcome. This certainly appears to be the case in this current proposal. This proposal should be rejected and a new, less biased and more objective reapportionment committee be formed to carry out its responsibility to the citizens and voters of Norman. Thank you.
Thank you. That closes public comment for the meeting tonight. Thank you very much for your input. I would like to ask for a motion to close the public hearing from up here. We went through all the forms. I was the first one, and I handed it to, I believe that it's Miss Catherine Walker. What's your name? Teresa Elam. Oh. 5921 Alameda. Here it is, Teresa Elam. Please come up.
I get very emotional about this, so I'm sorry. And I've been very emotional. It hurts my heart to see what's happening to the city of Norman. It's a wonderful city to live in, and I love this city very much. I was raised here. My parents bought the house at 5909 Alameda, where I grew up, and my parents still reside. My father passed away there 3 years ago. Ward 5 is important to me. It's, very important to me. I don't care if you are a Democrat. I don't care if you are a Republican. I don't care. But what you should care about is what you're doing to the city. Quit dividing the city. Us East Siders have a very important role to play in the city. Ward 5, we are the caretakers for your water. We are the caretakers for the green space of Norman. We are the caretakers for the watershed. And with that, I'm going to tell you, our former city council person, Michael Nash, we worked tirelessly on the well issue and the water issue and the boundaries. He came to me and he said, "Teresa, you are the most qualified person to be on the Reapportionment Committee for Ward 5. I want you there." Nobody has filled out an application to be on this committee for Ward 5. I filled one out. He recommended me. Mayor Clark does not like me. She did not allow me to be on this committee. 4 other names were recommended from Ward 5 to be on this committee. All 4 names that were put forward by Mr. Nash were declined by Mayor Bria Clark. I don't know how Karen Goodchild's name ended up coming up, because he called me and said, "What do you think about Karen?" And I said, "Well, she lives in Ward 5. She's lived there a long time. I think she'd be great." But the person that was supposed to represent was not Mr. Tallbear. What is the other person's name at large? From the governor of the Johnny Johnson. That was who Mayor Clark wanted to represent Ward 5 on this committee. He was moved to an at-large because we finally got a person on here. You cannot tell me this is not political. You cannot even begin to tell me that it's not political. Whenever you have someone who is the governor of the absentee Shawnee tribe to represent all of Ward 5, it is a conflict of interest. It was a conflict of interest. That is tribal land. That is not city land. The city of Norman has 0 jurisdiction on tribal land. None. You have no jurisdiction over the people on tribal land, and you have no jurisdiction over their land. They are a sovereign nation, and correct me if I'm wrong. And you have included that, and you have tried to include that so that you can take that 1,680 people farmland, 2,000 voters of farmland. The other thing I want to point out is you have said multiple times on your tape about OU, the OU issue, and we cannot divide the University of Oklahoma. Well, let me tell you something. OU is a state-owned university. What you're talking about not dividing is the land belonging to the OU Foundation. Part of the land on the north base.
Your
that
time
we
is
put
up.
into Ward 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Did we miss anyone?
Are members on this panel allowed to
No.
speak? Okay.
Are we going to read the emails
What emails?
in our packet? So they are part of the record?
Do we need to do so?
They'll be entered into the record.
They're entered into the record no matter if they're,
Okay. I was just curious.
okay. No, it's a good question. So apparently they're entered into the record without having to be read. I need a motion to close the public hearing.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Can I get a second for that?
A second.
Okay. Can we take a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Tallbear,
Yes.
Ms. Turner,
Yes.
Ms. Cardilla,
Yes.
Ms. Leidy,
Yes.
Ms. Holliday,
Yes.
Ms. Goodchild,
Yes.
Mr. Zorba,
Yes.
Mr. Lubbers,
Yes.
Mr. Hinkle.
Yes.
The motion carried 9-0.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to ask the staff if they have any information for the committee. None being seen, I will ask the members if they have comments to make.
Yes. Are these live? Okay. I think it is well known in this room that I am the person who made the comment. My comment was in response to several comments made on behalf of Ward 5. I hope you all have listened to the tape in full, very carefully. I understand that we, a rural community has special interests and needs that are different from other parts of the city. My comment was in response to suggestions that Ward 5 could not lose any population or be altered in any way because they have concerns about water, land, development. and so much more. But, you know, I find that misleading when we think about what's actually happening in Ward 5. I find it my duty to point out that that is not true, because just last year, Ward 5 did elect a businessman, not a farmer, and that's what was being said in that conversation, that we could not change anything because, you know, they need the power to elect a farmer. Currently, there are a lot of people in Ward 5 that are really upset about development, and they're not being represented. Let's see, forgive me, I've lost my place. My ward and my community have a shared interest of not living in fear and having violent white supremacist groups in our cities. We've talked about the East Side issue. I let you guys speak. I would appreciate it if you let me speak. Thank you. We have talked about the East Side issue, and we know that there is a large concentration of minorities in the East Side, and so that does matter to us. That is one of our common interests, our quality of life and our ability to live it happily and not threatened. So the fact that my point was, and it was in response to a conversation that maybe shouldn't have been happening, but I responded to a misleading comment. It was said that Ward 5 cannot lose population because they need to keep their rural power. I think that's, I let you all speak, and I would love the same respect. Thank you. That doesn't sound like banding together to vote for a common interest of rural owners. So why would we use that as a reason to refuse moving ward lines in 5? If this is supposed to be an equal and non-bipartisan, I don't see how making statements that don't reflect the truth about a ward in order to keep its power can be made without such as a refuting comment. If my comment was bipartisan or inappropriate in any way, I apologize for continuing a conversation that probably shouldn't have been happening then. I do not and will not ever be sorry for speaking out against racism and the terrorism of minorities. I've heard that, you know, there have been suggestions that we just ban this, and I don't really have an opinion on that here or there, but I know that we're dealing with people that are going to fight, complain, threaten, and sue about everything that does not support their agenda. If you feel the need to disband, I understand, but please, please assure that we do not lose what little diversity we have on this committee. I've learned this week that asking for consideration is a pretty radical thing to do in this town, but I urge you to take these things into consideration. I did not start the conversation. I did not.
We've already listened to public comment. I'm sorry. It is the time for the committee to communicate.
I would like to say I am the representative for Ward 5, and I reject quite a bit of that statement from my fellow committee. I was suggesting that we take the Cedar Lane area. I at no time said that we didn't need to take any from Ward 5. My suggestion was that we take some of the new developments, because those people have come to me and said, we want to be in a more urban ward. That was my suggestion. My concern was the farmland needed to stay with a common boundary and a common interest. I'm sorry that my fellow committee member felt like that was a racist comment and that I somehow...
I didn't say that, and I don't.
Okay. I'm just saying, I'm sorry if that's how you felt, if that was perceived, because that was not my intention at all.
Yes, and I'm not
I wanted to keep the rural areas of Ward 5 together and move, if we were going to, because Ward 5 now has the lowest population and is not the fastest growing. And that was my concern. and I wanted to move more of the urban neighborhoods to a more urban ward. Thank you.
Thank you. I would ask at this time if there is anything else to come before this committee.
I just wanted to say real quick in response, I did not mean that you had ulterior motives, but I was just saying that the idea that they need to band together for the common interest of rural priority conflicts with my city and ward's common interest of, safety and equality.
Okay, and I disagree with that, but thank you.
And that's okay. Thank you.
If there's nothing else remaining, I'm going to declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for the input.